Well, it's a cap. So the 22 billion is under the max that could be imposed. The 22 billion itself is a product of applying what the political decision that the overall tax rate is going to be frozen from year to year, and then it's applied to the value that really derives from the Department of Finance market value. So that we do our market value that computes into a taxable assessed value by applying all these rules, and then this average tax rate is applied to the taxable value to produce the overall levy. There are some adjustments, but that's basically the main thrust of how you get to the overall $22 billion.
You lost me again.
So
the $22 billion is a formula, and if I understood correctly, you said is under the limits?
It's under the constitutional limit. So then
under the allowable
levy that the city can raise in every year. And then to get to the $22 billion, you basically would start by, so the Department of Finance values properties. Then that gets converted into taxable assessed value by applying all the restrictions. Then to that the aggregate taxable assessed value, there's an average tax rate that the city applies, and that's what produces the $22 billion. And then how that $22 billion gets distributed among the 4 tax classes is where the class share formulas come into play.
So under the formula of the Constitution, it could not be $25 billion.
Well, there is an ultimate. I don't know exactly the number, what it is now.
Or it shouldn't be $20 billion.
Close. We're under the cap. I could get you information on what the cap would be.
You're under the cap. So going back to the Class 2 properties,
okay.
And we categorize residential rental properties in the unfair tax burden column. Is that correct?
I would say rentals pay a higher effective tax rate than co-ops and condos. And class
Doesn't that sound a little bit absurd that we're putting that tax burden on the renters?
I think that this is the ultimate political decision, how the distribution of the taxes play out. I mean, it is a byproduct. I don't think it was like an intention to do it per se. It's kind of a byproduct of other layers of decisions that were made about who gets exemptions, who has increased caps, who gets abatements.
What is the percentage of renters in a city versus ownership?
Do you know, Tim?
Samara, did you actually have the response to Mark's earlier question?
So yes, you had asked sort of how it was split between the tax classes, the share of market values versus the percentage of city property taxes paid by class. So one thing that I'll note when I give these percentages, of course, is the market values. This is not comparable sales. These are the market values as mandated by New York state law. So the market value that we're using is that market value, not necessarily comparable sales, except for Class 1. So Class 1's market value is, for this fiscal year, 46.25%.
46.25 is the market value share of the total tax?
Of all the tax classes, Class 1's market value is 46.25% of the all market values. Class 2 is 23.59%, Class 3 is 3.29%, and Class 4 is 26.87%. And then of the percentage of city property taxes paid by tax class, it's 15.49% for Class 1.
15 okay.
36.75% for Class 2, 6.85% for Class 3, and 40.91% for Class 4. And this information is in our property tax guide that I mentioned earlier.
So Class 2, the market value is 23.5 citywide?
Yes, that's for all of Class 2 citywide.
And they're paying 36.75% of the real estate tax burden?
Yes, that's right.
But
compared to Class 1, where the market value of all Class 1 citywide is 46%?
Yes.
And they're paying 15% of the tax burden?
Yes, this is based on the market values. But, one of the things I mentioned at the beginning, right, is the Class 1 market values being almost half of the full market values for the city. The Class 1 market values are the only market values that, for me, explaining things to a person in the public, those are the market values that make sense to people because those are more or less based on what properties are selling for. But Class 2 properties, that's based on the income producing potential over time. So it's not the same market, it's not apples to apples. It's just when you're looking at the overall market values that we do every year.
You've completely lost me.
I think
thought
the
this
point
was the
is-
value of each category, correct?
I think what Samara is saying is that the DOF market values, as we said, are understating sales-based values for co-ops and condos. So if you say that the share of the market, so Class 1 homes are valued as sales-based, so that's more equivalent to what people understand when they buy and sell their homes. Co-ops and condos use this method of looking at rental comparables, and it's below market, the sales-based market values.
Right.
So it's a little bit apples and oranges in the sense that the Class 1 homes are being valued by their true fair market value. Class 2 are being valued below that because of this legal restriction that we have to value them.
Co-op and condos. Do you have a breakdown of the residential rentals and the co-op and condo figures?
I do have. So this is actually of taxable properties in the city. There's 360,000 cooperative units, 157,000, this is Class 2, residential units, and 996,000 rental units.
So 360,000 co-ops. What was the 157?
That's condominium.
Condos. Okay, and then renters is,
996,000.
okay. And of those three, do you have the real estate tax burden? This is mind boggling. Absolutely. I just want to finish this.
A lot of our charts are showing the taxable AV. I'll have to get back to you to convert that into tax dollars, like what they ultimately pay in tax. burden.
Percentage,
Well, within, yeah, I see. So we have as levy, this is a distribution, if you take the full pie of 23 billion, what's paid by each share. So Class 1, it's 15%.
What do you mean last one, 15%?
I'm taking 23
Class
billion as the overall levy for fiscal year 2016.
Right.
How do you divide it up into different property types? So 15% for Class 1. For Class 2 condominiums, 7%. For Class 2 cooperatives, 9%. For Class 2 rentals, 19%. For Class 3, 6%. And for Class 4, 44%. So we can get you the dollars behind that, but this is just to get, that's the pie and how it adds up to 100%.
So in short, the renters or those rental properties are subsidizing the other tax classes, including the co-ops and condos.
For us to really answer your question, I think we're going to have to get back to, we need to look at the effective tax rate, because I think what we're trying to explain is looking at the market values, because the market values that we use for tax purposes are not actual sales-based market values for the same tax classes. We're using a different standard. So even though we can give a percentage of a market value, if you're looking at the market value for a Class 2 property versus the market value for a Class 1 property, the Class 2 property market value probably represents a percentage of the true sales-based market value. So the pieces of the pie are adding up to the market value that we use for tax purposes based on what the law tells us to do. But I think what you're trying to get at is what the effective tax rate is for different kinds of property owners in the city. And we can get back to you with that.
I would like those numbers, but go back to this one scenario. 360,000, 360 for co-ops, 157 condos, 996,000 rental units, and the share you broke down was they pay 9%, 7%, 19% respectively, which would mean the residential rental market in Class 2 is paying 19% of that tax burden, which goes back to 36% of the total market real estate share citywide.
Well, that's the 19% is the share of the total taxes they pay. I think what Samara is saying is what we really need to do is give you a common denominator. So you have the levy. How does that compare with apples to apples? If you value them all the same,
Maybe I'm asking a question the wrong way. How do we justify just Class 2? When 19% of the real estate tax burden is on residential rental properties versus 7% for condos and 9% for co-ops?
I think that what we're trying to explain is that I understand what your question is, and you really want to understand the impact of the tax system on the Class 2 owners, right? How does it break down for rental owners versus condo owners versus co-op owners versus Class 1 homeowners? And I think what we're trying to say is, although we can look at the sheer percentage that they pay of the total market value for tax purposes, for us to really answer you in terms of what their burden is when you're looking at the true market value of the property that somebody's paying for it, we need to get back to, because we have to sort of standardize the market values so that we're looking at market values that are sales-based for all of the tax classes. Because the market values that we have here is sales-based for one tax class, and then it's based on the income-producing potential for another tax class, so it doesn't actually represent what it could sell for.
Could I just ask, with this information that the Assemblyman is asking for, that you could compile it? This is a very complicated issue. But what's happening in New York City also has an impact on the rest of the state, because a lot of people are going through different issues. Are any of you available to come to Albany so we can recollect ourselves once you have that? So we can go over all of it very specifically if we don't have the answers today.
Yes, we'd be
Can we
happy
do
to
that?
come to talk to you
Would
about it.
that be, I know you want the answer now, but
And I'm sure I'm going to come back to it. I'm sure others have questions. Would I be wrong in making a statement that a renter, and we assume that the real estate taxes is translated into a rent increase passed on to tenants, that a tenant in the South Bronx, the poorest congressional district in the country, is technically subsidizing, let's say, a two-family home in Park Slope, Brooklyn, because of the unfair tax burden?
I have to, I don't want to, I know you want a direct answer, but I think this is where we really need to kind of show you some of the data, because it's not only an issue of what's the overall impact, it's also geographically. How does it play out in different neighborhoods and stuff? So what we can try to do, and a lot of this, why we're not trying to, dodge your question, is that we have the official values you're asking for us to do, and do estimates, which is a reasonable request, but then I think another layer of it is to show it by neighborhood. So you could see that neighborhoods are going to vary. And that's part of the issue of tax reform, is that it doesn't play out the same way for every neighborhood. Because the neighborhoods have had the experience of 35 years of a tax system that's produced a result. So to really get to maybe you're right, the nitty-gritty and understand that, you kind of have to see the lay of the land in different ways. Here's it by value of properties. Here's it by neighborhood. Here's it by property type. And then kind of try to analyze what's the impact now and what do you want to change.
So then I'll revise it. Let's pick the poorest borough, the borough of the Bronx, and say within one neighborhood, we have renters and we have co-op and condos. And we'll use the South Bronx as an example. Am I correct to say that the renter is paying more than a condo and co-op owner on a tax rate?
Can't say that, but I can't.
You just gave me the number of
I can say,
19%.
What I can say is, and I think this is true, that if you looked at the highest valued properties in the city, they're probably being subsidized by everyone else. But within any individual neighborhood, it could be that the market values play out differently. That in an area, it's really the system is designed now to, if you're protecting against too dramatic increases and you have methodologies that restrict how you value based on sales, in some sense you are kind of protecting more gentrifying areas. But within individual neighborhoods, it can vary. We're giving you aggregate statistics. I think what you really need to kind of get at the bottom line of your question is looking at it maybe at a neighborhood level to see what are the relative effective tax rates, not only citywide, but when you get to a particular neighborhood, how it plays out. because it's going to be different from neighborhood to
So then I
neighborhood.
would request a breakdown be done by borough and whatever subdivision of that you have, and then we can get a better understanding. But based on the numbers that you gave, it looks like renters are subsidizing the rest of the city, especially when it comes to owners,
I think, as I said, I think it is true.
let alone co-ops and condos.
When you look at the underlying valuation methodology, there are issues that of relative burdens overall of rentals being valued at a higher percentage of their sales price than co-op and condos. But it could be very different when you break it down by different neighborhoods and stuff. And so part of what I think would give more meaning to your questions, and I know you want an answer, is what you're saying, more distributional information.
Okay,
And I
we
guess
will
my
get
last
that.
question for
Okay.
you, and then we can let the others, and I'll try to come back to you. If we gave you a magic wand, would it be a quick fix just to value all properties
It's on my list, too.
and charge them on a tax rate? And we can come up with the 4 classes and say, this is your, whether we use market value or income approach, according to that category? Because I also see a big difference in Class 3. If the Class 3 properties are paying 32% of the city's real estate value, but are paying how much in the form of the tax bill?
So it's 3% of market value, 7% of taxes paid.
And that gets passed on to the consumer.
I think it does get paid to the ratepayers.
And again, it looks like they are being assessed higher tax rates compared to the homeowners.
I think it's probably true to say that for Class 3 utilities, they pay a higher percentage of the tax levy than their market value share.
So would it be safe to say the system seems to be broken?
Again, it's broken, but I don't have a magic wand.
So I'm going to give you a magic wand.
But, well,
Correct
look,
this for me.
I think the issue is that, if you look at it, you're raising a lot of very legitimate issues, and I say in my testimony said there are inequities in the system, but they are products of a lot of political decisions. So it's really who gets protected, if you really wanted to create a totally level playing field as far as, what we call effective tax rate, what people are paying relative to some common denominator, sales-based values or whatever, it will raise a lot of questions, not only immediately of redistributing the tax burden, and then there's the issue going forward. So let's say we do our magic wand, and in day one, everyone pays the same percent. Going forward, if you have different rates of growth in different neighborhoods, that's going to get out of whack unless you pull some, and then if you put caps on that, you kind of get back into the equity issues. So, one approach is, do you want to look at relief that is more targeted, like income-based or for seniors or something, and try to create more equity among the rest of the population. But there's also questions that are political questions about relative burdens of commercial versus residential. So from our point of view, we do believe, and again, we don't have a magic wand even for this one, that when you look at valuation, real property tax law 581 is a problem. And a lot of it's also the transparency issue that, we're giving values to co-ops and condominiums, which most owners don't understand what the values are, because it's not based on how they buy and sell their units. So we do spend a lot of time looking at that and try to think about, that's one area where probably having sales-based values makes sense from a point of view of transparency, but then you'll have issues about, how does it play out as far as ultimate taxes? It doesn't necessarily mean if if we're saying we're undervalued, if it went up to market value, you could adjust elsewhere. You could do things on the assessed value side to lower the impact of having a higher market value. But we do think it's important to have correct market values that people can understand. Because I think a lot of the questions we get when people get their notices of values is, what is this number? Because it's like, you can have a co-op being valued at, 30% of its sales price, and people just don't understand where that comes from.
Right. All right, I'm going to stop you. Assemblyman Rodriguez also joined us down here. Victor, do you have questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the Department of Finance for spending some time with us and answering some questions and giving some testimony this afternoon. As you can tell, there's a lot of passion around this issue, and an analogy that's been used that you're not comparing apples to apples, you're comparing apples to oranges or something like that. Why can't we just create a simple system of apples and have sort of as you mentioned before, First Deputy, sort of a common denominator, and then you can make your values and assessments according to that, and then I guess most folks would understand, become less frustrated with the process, if that's possible at all.
Well, as I've said, and one thing for at least the owner-occupied properties, having sales-based values for
Get
all.
close, a little
I'm
closer, I
sorry.
think, maybe.
So for the co-ops and condos that are owner-occupied compared to the small homes, that is one thing that we're mentioning, is that, if you still have the layers of questions of ultimate tax burden, but if they all were sales-based, then it would be understandable where the values come from. For rentals and even Class 4 properties, the issue is, do we use income-based methods, because that is a standard mass appraisal technique. And part of the issue there is also just making sure that there's horizontal equity, that you have similar properties treated similarly. But then you have the issue, again, a lot of exemptions and abatement programs have very worthwhile objectives, but that does kind of create, that's just, you have to be cognizant that creates another layer. But to your first question, yes, I think especially, the 581 restriction hits the co-ops and condos. We think that is an issue, that it's not, you can't have the apples to apples compared to small homes.
Thank you.
Okay, Dan Ford?
Thank you, Sandy, and thank you for coming and testifying. I'm going to pretend for a little bit that you all are deputy mayors, not deputy commissioners, and ask you some questions about the future rather than just explanation about the inequities of the system, because they're well known to most people, and they go back to 1981 and political decisions that were made then. Well, I want to start going back 40-plus years to Hellerstein, and that opinion, Court of Appeals, 40-plus years ago. Wasn't part of the assumption by the court back then that the current system back then was unconstitutional because it treated similarly situated people in a discriminatory or disproportionate way?
I think that's correct.
Okay. And then the results of 6 years of intense political discourse, compromise, overriding a gubernatorial veto led to the current system in 1981. That's correct?
I think that's fair.
All right. And then we move forth, different assumptions made in 1981, but the essence of the system, despite the drastic changes in co-op or condo implementation in the city of New York, certainly Manhattan has changed, but the system largely, except for the abatement recommended through the 1993 Commission, implemented in 1997, has largely stayed the same during that time period. Isn't that correct?
I think the structure of the tax system has stayed the same. There have been changes to it, and as I mentioned, the class share system has had several episodes where it was adjusted some. But the structure has been the same for 35 years.
And we've gone through what that structure means, and I think it was in your testimony. To your credit, you said the losers will not be shy about expressing their opinions. But if that was actually true, this room would be stocked floor to ceiling with renters, would it not?
Well, that's something that we
We
have to give
didn't
more
really invite
analysis of.
everybody.
But I was giving some aggregate statistics, which I think is fair to say that in general, if you look at the aggregate data, the rentals do have an effective tax rate higher. But the part of the issue, I think, as the Assembly member asked for, you really need to get into the weeds a little bit to understand distributionally who's impacted by different types of options. So it could be that in different parts of the city and for different subsets, it plays out differently. That for some, one solution or one option produces a result that's desirable, but it could have a byproduct that doesn't necessarily affect other neighborhoods the same. So I think you kind of have to lay it all out and then try to get an understanding of how it's going to play out, not only citywide, but for different neighborhoods, different subgroups, and even different sales value groups.
But is the city concerned with the fact that a well-tailored Article 78 proceeding or a lawsuit seeking to disqualify the current property tax system based on many of the same factors that found the old system in the mid-'70s unconstitutional, is the city concerned that a lawsuit of that nature could be successful?
I'm not really the person to comment on that. Do you want to say anything, Carl, our legal counsel?
Well, I mean, I think it's been in effect for a long time. I mean, the challenges that have been made to it have been, I mean, in the beginning, it was challenged, but it was upheld. I mean.
But if
and
the
there was-
inequities grow over time, if the inequities grow greater between Class 1 or even intra-Class 2 between the different groups within Class 2.
There was,
I'm not suggesting, I'm saying, is the city concerned about about the property tax system staying in effect as is, specifically because good times or bad, deep recession or not, what the city has is that deep, sustainable, consistent tax dollars from the property tax system. That is, amongst my greatest fears, is the city of New York cannot function without the money it derives from the property tax system. It simply could not. And even during the Great Recession, those revenues did not change in any way. My concern is the mayhem that would run through to the city of New York if this system was found unconstitutional, because in my view, the widening divergencies and the widening discrepancies, not only between Class 1 and Class 2 or the other classes, but intra-class itself.
well, there was a recent lawsuit that was brought by the renters.
Right.
You know,
Just
claiming-
renters, though.
claiming
What-
discrimination,
Right.
and that was, dismissed by the courts. I mean, certainly, we're concerned if there's inequity. I mean, that's something. But in terms of a lawsuit, I mean, right now, I don't think that's our prime concern. We're trying to make the system as equitable as we can within the current law.
Within trying to make the system as equitable as possible, let me ask you a couple questions about mechanics of things. You talked earlier about RPTL 581, and to your credit, you admitted it is a problem. Can you describe a little, well, don't spend too much time on the problems. Everyone knows the problem. But what would happen to the system if RPTL 581A was repealed, amended without additional holistic or comprehensive changes?